Hey guys, Squiv, the Lazy Geek here, and today we're gonna vanquish the Tokyo light pollution together. If it applies in Tokyo, by the way, it probably applies to pretty much any place in the world. This is not a revolutionary method. It has been used for a while. I've used it for a while. It's called narrowband imaging. Narrowband imaging, it uses specific narrowband filters, and the principle is that it will only work typically with what we call emission nebulae, like the Horse Nebula, the Orion Nebula, the Eagle Nebula, the Lagoon Nebula, all of those nebula, where many of them are in the Milky Way. And the principle is that those nebula, due to the way that they're actually made, what they're actually made of, they emit at specific wavelength, like the wavelength of hydrogen alpha, or the wavelength of oxygen 3, or the wavelength of sulfur 2. And both hydrogen alpha and sulfur 2, like from a visual point of view, they are in the red spectrum, and oxygen 3 is in the blue kind of blue-green type of spectrum. But what's really cool is that because those bandwidths, those wavelengths, those little parts of the light spectrum can be isolated. You can use filters to really look only at that little frequency, and then you exclude anything else in terms of light, which means that light from the moon, light from Tokyo, light from Singapore, light from London, light from New York, all of those big cities, the light gets mostly cut out. Of course, the small portion of light that is in the little area of optical wavelength or light wavelengths that you're trying to image is still coming through, but it rejects so much of the light pollution. And I have in this little filter wheel actually have narrowband filters for H-alpha, S2 and O3. So H-alpha, hydrogen alpha, S2 sulfur 2, and O3 is oxygen 3. Most of the time you can start with hydrogen alpha filter only, and then you can do what we call H-alpha LRGB combinations or H-alpha RGB combinations, where instead of doing LRGB, and only people who have done monochrome imaging will kind of follow me here, but instead of using the luminance filter, you use the H-alpha filter, or you add H-alpha data at the end, something like that. And then you get a more defined type of nebula, which can be very useful. If you want to do pure narrowband, the cheapest way is to start with two filters, H-alpha and O3, which will give you nice what we call bicolor narrowband pictures, which can actually be tweaked to be very close to the real colors of the objects if you were to use non-narrowband or normal imaging like LRGB filter or a one-shot color camera like this one. And we have another thing with narrowband filters is the sulfur 2. You can use hydrogen alpha, O3 and sulfur 2. You can take 3 images and then combine them, and if you map, you have many ways you can map those 3 wavelengths to different colors, red, green and blue, and one of the more popular ways is the one used by the Hubble Space Telescope, which is SHO. So S will be the red band, sulfur, red, green will then be hydrogen alpha, even though hydrogen alpha is in the red part of the spectrum, will just say that it's green, and blue is going to be oxygen 3, and then you have to tweak that image to get what is called the Hubble palette, which is kind of that blue and gold type of palette that is very pleasing to the eye, and which I have actually never managed to properly get. If anyone has tips as to how to do that, let me know, because I struggle at processing narrowband imaging. But anyway, going back to the filters themselves, the filters have what we call a band path. It's measured as full width half measure, or FWHM, and it's basically, well, it's just a measure of how wide or how much light the filter lets in. Now we know exactly what light we want to let in from the nebula, so we would want, in theory, a filter that's as narrow as possible around what we want. And most of the filters, the cheaper ones, they'll be 12 nanometers, maybe 7 nanometers, 6 nanometers, and then it gets to 5 and 3 nanometers, and that gets very expensive very quickly. And as far as I know, I mean, until recently, 3 nanometers only, Astrodon, a company called Astrodon would do them. Astrodon has since then been bought by somewhere else, I don't remember the name, but they had the highest quality narrowband filters. But those narrowband filters, they cost a lot. The 3 little tiny filters that I have in here cost more than this telescope, this focuser, and this camera all together. So it's not cheap, but it is really the only way to reliably beat light pollution in large cities like Tokyo, even though it works only on nebulae. One of the issues, by the way, with the bandpass of those narrowband filters is that they let in only the light, the wavelength that we want, sure. But if you have a very fast optical system, like a camera lens, like this thing, this is a f1.8 camera lens, then the filter, the light rays that are incoming into the filter have a sharper angle. If you're interested about that angle, I have a video about filters and vignetting that explains that, which I'm linking to above. But by doing so, they actually shift the band pass of the filter so that it's no longer centered on exactly what you want to capture from your object. So that's another thing to keep in mind, so that there are even specific narrowband filters that are made for f2 imaging from batter, and those are good for like camera lens imaging, or systems called hyperstar imaging or RASA imaging, which are like a type of Schmidt-Cassegrain based telescope, which I have not used, so I cannot really comment upon. But you can see that things get already a bit complex. But most of the time, unless you're in Tokyo or in the center of London, I would recommend 5 nanometer narrowband filters, at least for H-alpha, because H-alpha can then capture a neighboring wavelength called N2, which is good for planetary nebulae. Whereas if you go down to 3 nanometers, it will only capture H-alpha. So there's all sorts of considerations, but 5 nanometers for most people is the right bandwidth, band pass of the filter. I go 3 nanometers because I'm in Tokyo and it's really very, very light polluted. So with that said, there's some more things as well about those filters, is that I've seen people, and I was the same as well, saying like, hey, I bought those 3 nanometers very tight narrowband filters, but now I have to expose for super long. It was much easier when I had 7 nanometers or 12 nanometers filters. It's true, but it's very, 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 very wrong as well. The reason you can expose for shorter and still get a lot of light in your subframes when you have a 12 nanometer or 7 nanometer narrowband filter is because you're letting it a lot of light pollution and other sources of light that you actually don't want in your image. Tighter is always better, even if you have to expose longer, because that means you actually get more signal versus the noise that's caused by light pollution and other unwanted light. So you have better signal to noise ratio in the end, and signal to noise ratio is what we as astrophotographers are after. We're not after signal for signal's sake, we are after signal to noise ratio. Always something to remember. That's why tighter filters are typically better, with some exceptions, as I mentioned with N2. Okay, so another thing that you'll need, and sorry this is a long introduction, is a monochrome camera. Yes, you can use narrowband filters with a color camera, but the color camera has small light filters, red, green, and blue filters on each of the pixels. And if you're going to use H-alpha, for example, with a color camera, only 1/4 of the pixels in your sensor will be useful to get that data. So it is possible you will get an image, and that image can actually be very impressive, but it's simply not as optimized as true monochrome with narrowband imaging. So I do not recommend using narrowband filters with a one-shot color camera, except if you're going to use another type of narrowband filters, which are the multi-band narrowband filters, like the OPT Triad Ultra or the ZW, duo band, I think. There's the Optolong L Enhance. These are newer types of filter. They've started to become popular in the last 2 or 3 years, and they're made for one-shot color cameras, but they are still not as good by far compared to true narrowband filters that do one band pass at a time with a monochrome camera. I know, I've tested it. I've tested actually the best, what is considered the best and certainly the most expensive of those one-shot color narrowband filters, the OPT Triad Ultra, and while it works It's really very far away from real narrowband, what I call real narrowband. So anyway, now we are ready. I've done the introduction, you know what I'm talking about. So we are going to remove this filter wheel, remove this camera, because this camera is color camera. I want to replace it with my monochrome camera. I also want to check my filters to make sure that I do not have too much dust on my filters. Why not remove dust while I'm at it? So first things first, I am going to disconnect my camera, and I'm just going to reuse those cables exactly as is with my other camera, so I don't need to do anything else than just unscrewing it and very carefully placing it here. The window that's on top of, not of the sensor, but the window that's on the flange of the camera is actually like 1 millimeter roughly inside. So by doing that, by putting it on the table, I'm actually not endangering my camera, just so you know. But yeah, ideally I would have brought like some nice kitchen paper or something like that, or tissue paper to put it on there. Next point is, since I want to double check my filters, I'm actually going to remove the little cable to the filter wheel, and we are going to remove that filter wheel. Okay. One thing you've noticed is that I have this little spacer there that's 1 millimeter thick. It is for me to achieve the best distance between my focuser and my telescope. If you're also wondering what this little cardboard thing that's very junky on my focuser is, or what this little butt cover on my scope is, you may want to watch my video about fixing light leaks. But anyway, now we are ready, and I wanted to clean my filters. So you know me, I don't really like doing stuff the hard way, so I'll just use air on my filters. It's the easiest, and unless I touch them, I won't do anything more. So filter wheel, right now it's on the L filter, so I can see when I do that, but I'm gonna just unscrew all of these little screws there, remove the filter wheel, do a little psh psh on them, and let's do that. Here I am, I've removed this cover, and now we can see the actual filter wheel, and here are those beautiful filters. So I'm just going to do a little something like this. I'll even do it in this direction so that the dust can actually fall down with the gravity. And I'm going to also do that on the other side as well, with being very careful that I do not touch any of the filters. Okay, so this, by the way, it's almost like a mirror. I think you cannot see me. If I look through it, it's actually, I see blue-green kind of color. That's my oxygen 3 filter. This filter, same thing, but I can see some very deep red when I look through a little bit. That's my sulfur 2 filter. And this filter there, which is also deep red, but slightly less deep, is my hydrogen alpha filter, H-alpha filter. And that H-alpha filter is the master. It's the one that provides the best contrast, because typically emission nebulae actually have their strongest signal in H-alpha. And H-alpha, like red, also is pretty far from the peak of LED light emissions, and also from like the moon reflection, the reflection of the sunlight by the moon. So it's actually like the best filter you can use. That's why H-alpha RGB images can be absolutely amazing. And then I'm just going to do my standard LRGB filter, even though I haven't used them for ages. One of the things, by the way, for filters, I'm going to do an episode probably as part of my Beginning Astrophotography for Beginners, for Lazy People series, which you can watch above. I'm likely going to do an episode on back focus, how to reach the proper back focus between the focuser of your telescope and your camera sensor. One of the things is that filters actually change a little bit the back focus. You typically have to add 1 millimeter for 3 millimeters of filter glass worth in there. And the Astrodon filters are actually 3 millimeters thick, so it changes my back focus distance by 1 millimeter. Okay, and one last touch from the inside. Okay, and it's not a big deal anyway. Immediately I put the cover on, I'm also going to put a little cover on here so I don't get dust back on the filters immediately. It's not a big deal because anyway you can correct that with flats, but you know, good practice. Also, pro tip, do not drop those little tiny screws that are super hard to find on this gray floor afterwards. By the way, when I'm putting back this, I try to keep those screws not super tight. Don't go ham on the screws because you know you will need to get them off at some point. And don't drop it again. Okay, and I am ready. And by the way, I'm going to put back this filter wheel on there, and this bulge there will be towards the camera. For the ZW filter wheels, that's where the filters are closest to the sensor, and to avoid vignetting, you want to have your filters as close as possible to the sensor, as a commander on one of my earlier videos pointed out to me. I should also not forget to keep using my little 1mm spacer there. Now to screw it back in, by the way, I'm going to move a bit the mount like this, so that I can use this little ring easily and it won't fall. My filter wheel is back on. I had my L filter kind of exposed while I was doing that, so I'm gonna do another quick touch. Again, no big deal, I can use my flat frames. And then I am going to remove this camera from my cute little lens there. And this is going to be my 1600 mm cool, so my monochrome camera that will go together with the narrowband filters. So I'll do the same, by the way. Okay, I have my camera on. Time to reconnect the camera. The focuser. And the filter wheel. And now I'm just going to reconnect my OSC cameras to something so it doesn't get dust on the window. This is the cutest imaging rig ever. Anyway, and now I am ready for narrowband imaging. Okay, and we've just, installed our narrowband filters, installed the monochrome camera, made sure everything was clean, the filter wheel is on, the camera is on, everything's good. By the way, if you want me to actually show you how I put in the filters in the filter wheel in the first place, let me know. It's it's not very easy, but it's very obvious. The problem is that the narrowband filters I use are very thick, so it's a bit difficult to actually make them fit well, this filter wheel from ZW, but it works well. Now, one thing also, once you've done something like that, what is the first thing you want to do? You want to take new flat frames. So even if it's cloudy tonight, which it likely will be, I can take that time to take flat frames. And I can also take that time to take dark frames, because it's been a while since I've used this monochrome camera, so I need to refresh my dark frame library. I also know what exposure I'm going to use with narrowband, because I know the focal ratio of that telescope, and I know how long of exposures I was using for my f7 Edge HD 800 telescope prior to that. So I can already take my dark frames and get on with my life and be ready for when the time comes to image. Narrowband, again, I cannot show you results right now because it will take time for me to actually get the proper skies to show you the results. The Tokyo summer tends to have very nice blue sky days and very cloudy nights because we don't have enough with just the hard challenge of light pollution, of course. So here we are. And I'm showing you still like something I obtained last year. It's just a couple of data on the Horsehead Nebula in H alpha with my Edge HD 800 from this balcony here. So you can see how powerful H alpha can be even from a very light polluted area like Tokyo. And one more thing is, if you've done this kind of equipment changes, it's possible that you have actually kicked or changed a bit the alignment of your mount, especially if it's a smaller mount. So you will likely want to double check your polar alignment as well. Okay, and that's pretty much it for today. So thank you so much for watching. There's tons of new content coming on this channel. I try to upload every day, as you may have noticed. I don't know how long it's going to last, but I'm definitely doing my best for that. So please make sure to subscribe to the channel to not miss any of these educational videos that I'm putting on. Please also click on the notification bell button so that you know when my videos come up. And thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to look up at the stars whenever you can, and I'll see you next time.